right. I think we'll go ahead and get started. It's a couple minutes after 9:30, and now is as good a time as any. And thank you all so much for being here this morning. My name is Adam Waite, Minister of Music here at Montview Church, and judging by the faces I see out there, most of you know that fact about me already. But we also obviously are welcoming some folks on the live stream. And yes, it's great to be with you all here this morning. This is part 2 of our adult education series that's running throughout the course of the year. I'm not entirely sure how many parts there will be. There will at least be one more, if not a couple more. And it's in conjunction with our Reparations Royalty Pilot Program that we've begun here at Montview Church just about a month and a half ago now. So to little show of hands, if you were at worship, I think it was just last Sunday, our choir sang Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, and who here noticed the blurb in the bulletin that accompanied that performance? All right, excellent. And that blurb told you that what you were listening to was in fact an American Negro Spiritual, and that as part of our Reparations Royalty Pilot Program, we were making a contribution from our operating fund into our Reparations Royalty Fund, and then also encouraging you to make a donation on top of that. So an important part of our reparations royalty work is the educational opportunity that is there for all of us in better understanding this really hugely important and consequential music. Not only important in its artistic value, but also important in its historical value. Today we're going to be discussing the history of the spiritual, but in future sessions we're going to get into what came after the spiritual and why the spiritual is such an important aspect of American musical cultural life in the 20th century. It is truly the foundational element upon which so much of American music was built upon. So I'm excited to get into that process with you all. Today, I wanted to get the band back together, so to speak. We were, prior to COVID, you may remember that our children's music director at the time was a gentleman by the name of Craig Robertson, and Craig was out here in Colorado doing his doctoral degree at UC Boulder. And Craig came to us at the beginning of that time, and I think he was here for about 3 years or so and left a huge impact on our church that went well beyond the children's music program. So prior to COVID, one of the last things, adult education opportunities that we offered was a 3-week course on the spirituals, gospel, and jazz. And we co-taught that with Diane Briscoe, who's also here today. And there was a lot of wonderful things that we discussed in that 3-course session. And I thought, boy, this would be really nice to get back into some of that stuff. Let me see if Craig is available. And it turns out Craig is available. And Craig is now Dr. Craig Robertson, and there he is.
Was that dramatic enough? I don't know.
So Dr. Craig Robertson is now the Director of Choral Activities at Mary Baldwin University in Virginia. And on top of, he just led a performance of Vivaldi's Gloria a few nights ago, but he's also turned into quite the in-demand clinician, traveling all over the mid-Atlantic area, working with different universities and high schools with their choral programs. So we're actually really fortunate, even just to get Craig for a remote drop-in, because he's literally squeezing us in between 2 clinician visits, the Vivaldi, and then he's got something next weekend, and it's just crazy. So before we get started, Craig, and on the serious stuff, how are you?
I'm doing well. Good morning, Montview. I am so thrilled to be here. I am doing well. As you can see, I've gotten a little older since last you saw me. Hi, Diane. I see Diana. So many wonderful faces. I miss you all so much. I told Adam that you decided to renovate after I left. I'm kind of disappointed, but that's okay. So, but things are going well. This is year 4 for me here at Mary Baldwin, and I am so thrilled and happy and touched that you would invite me to come back. And Montview I was telling Adam, has been very detrimental in me getting this degree and being here where I am today. And I am wearing pants this time because the last time I interviewed with Montview, I had on shorts. That was in 2016. And so this time I decided to wear pants this time. So, but I won't have to stand up. So we're really good. I'm doing excellent. Things are well. I'll be 50 next year. Can you believe it? I was so young the last time you saw me. Gosh, I know. And so hopefully we'll get a chance to see each other again really soon. And I'm super excited to share with you a little bit about my research on this topic. I don't know what else to say. I'm going to Atlanta next week. I'm doing all types of clinicking because of what Montview has also instilled into me with just a musical excellence. There is no church like Montview. I have not found another church home. Sorry, because Montview spoiled me so badly. So I guess we're going to get serious now. I'm done.
Well, one last update on your personal life, Craig, if you will. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about what you do at Mary Baldwin?
Oh, yes. Okay, yes. So I teach. I'm the choral director. I have 2 choirs right now. I also have, I teach conducting, choral literature. I teach all of the music education courses. I teach music appreciation to gen ed students. I've taught a course on, I started and will be teaching a course next semester on Black sacred music that can get diversity credit for students. I've taught a course on hip hop in Atlanta. I've taught a course on Renaissance, Harlem Renaissance music, and just anything that you can think of, I've been involved with here. I'm also the chair of the admissions committee. I'm on the appellate board committee. So I do a lot of things. I do a lot of recruitment for the institution as well. You may not know that Mary Baldwin was for many, many years an all-women's college. Now we are co-ed, so I'm out recruiting lots of tenors and basses for my SATB choir. I started a holiday festival similar to what you see at CU Boulder. I'm doing a high school choral festival with the Grammy Award-winning artist in February. And what else? Oh, and we do a choir tour. So we're going to Washington, D.C., Maryland, Baltimore area in February. We went to Atlanta last year doing lots of recruitment. Yeah, and that's what I'm doing. Turned down lots of Carnegie Hall gigs because I'm so busy, you know. But so yeah, that's what I do here. A little bit. It's Stanton, Virginia. I know it's spelled Staunton, but they pronounce it Stanton. We're here in the Shenandoah Valley of the Blue Ridge Mountains, and it's just nestled here between Charlottesville and Harrisonburg. So we're in a rural area. We do a huge Harry Potter festival. So if you're into that, you should come in the summer. It's fabulous. And check us out. When I would tell Adam about our holiday festival that's coming up, you guys can, get a ticket, a virtual link, and watch unless you want to come this way. I hope Heidi's out there. She should be here coming to see me soon. And then, so that's all I do here, which is a lot. And they're always adding more things because the more you do, the more they want you to do. Which I don't mind because I love what I do. Yeah. I learned it from Adam.
Well, and they are very, very... I know. Can't stop Craig Robertson. You can only hope to contain him.
Right.
And they are very fortunate to have you at Mary Baldwin University, which I'm sure some of our folks know, but is historically a Presbyterian
That's
university.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So
That's
I
right.
think I find it just terribly amusing that the Presbyterians keep finding our way into your lives.
I know.
Yeah. Well, Craig, let's get to the business at hand here. Your doctoral dissertation, which I guess you previewed for us a few years back when we did that presentation, the 3 of us, Beauty for Ashes. And your presentation or your dissertation rather, delved quite a bit into the historical context, the history of the spiritual, and you did a really good job about then providing a lot of that history and context, and then turning it around into, present day use, right, and performance practice. Now I might be kind of, I just told Craig I'm just asking questions, and we'll see what comes out of it. So he doesn't know this question is coming. But I wonder, given the introduction of your doctoral dissertation, did you feel compelled to write it because of certain things you were seeing performance practice-wise from university choirs, high school choirs? You mentioned in that dissertation this idea about a spiritual just being put on the back end of a concert program as something that's happy and fun and a real kind of showstopper. Why don't you talk a little bit about that, and if that was in fact, if that factored it all into your reason for writing the dissertation that you did?
Sure. Well, thank you for that question. And I agree that partly it was that things that I had heard over the years, the course of my public school teaching and even listening to different performances, that, the spiritual was placed at the end of concerts as that quote-unquote showstopper, which, and also they were not necessarily treated as equal to the traditional Western classical music. So when you otherize the spiritual, in my opinion, you otherize the culture. So it's as if, Bach and Beethoven, we're going to really study those pieces and dig deep into Bach's life and dig deep into Brahms and Chopin. And here's the spiritual, just to check our little box that we did it. And I thought that was not quite appropriate, particularly being that is a part of my cultural ancestry, that I feel connected to the spiritual, not just from a musical standpoint, but, I'm Black, surprise. So that's a part of my cultural heritage. So I felt that we should consider it as part of the traditional canon of our choral music, and we should treat it as such. Now, I will say that I have put the spiritual at the end of a performance for pedagogical reasons, not as a fun showstopper, but because sometimes the spiritual can be vocally taxing because they're very heavy, they're very thick, and it requires a lot of stamina to perform them. So we would put them maybe sort of at the end because we know that they're going to use a lot of vocal strength, and we didn't want to tire the voice out. But since then, I decided, you know what, I'm going to put them at the beginning because now the voice is fresh, it's alive, it has not been used as much for the performance, so we're going to put them at the beginning. And I've heard people say, oh, the spiritual is so much fun, right? And the term fun, I took issue with because I felt like maybe you're thinking that the spiritual, it's energetic, and because it's fast, not necessarily fun. Because even the faster paced, energetic spirituals these are words and music by people who were being owned by another person, that were being abused by another group of people, that were being murdered and raped by another group of people. And so I thought that we should maybe just change our thinking about the spiritual, and I wanted to be involved in that shift.
I think that's a great point for us to pivot into the history of the spiritual.
Yep.
Why don't you tell us a bit of what you found in your research about, how the spiritual came to be?
Okay, well, there are several things. When you think about the spiritual, you can't talk about Negro spirituals without talking about the enslaved Africans, right? And slavery, the mid-Atlantic transatlantic slave trade. How did this music get to America? And we think about from the west coast of Africa that even African music was very rhythmic, syncopated. It used lots of call and response. They used lots of drumming. It was very high energy. They sang and danced for almost every single thing. When they went out to war, they sang. When they won the war, they sang. When people died, when they were born, for any and everything, they were singing and dancing. So music was heavily ingrained into their cultural experience, right? So of course, they would bring that over to America. And there are research articles, research documents that chronicle that some of the slave ships, the captains of the slave ships, that they heard the Africans moaning and singing at the bottom of the slave ship, and they didn't understand what was happening, but they heard them doing that. So when they came over into the colonies, of course they brought their cultural experiences with them. Now it's key to note that the slave owners decided to put different tribes together on one plantation so that they would not communicate because they were enemies of each other. So, but what they had in common was this musical element, was this were these ideas of drumming that they had together. So they brought that together, and you began to hear them come together to drum and sing and play. And when we start to see the enslaved going to the white church, then we start seeing the text of the spiritual come to be. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about that coming up next, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, a couple of things, right? Let's unpack the drumming bit, because we also know that instruments weren't allowed.
Right.
So they're coming from a highly rhythmic culture, right? In place where it's so much ingrained into their DNA and their sense of music and just being, right? And now here we are in a place where that isn't allowed. And furthermore, the predominant Western European culture does not place emphasis on rhythm too, right? So you've got that added element as well. Right. I guess before we get into the church bit, what do you want to tell us about the way that rhythm then was kind of manifest both in body movement, right? Stuff that was allowed, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, then it begins to come into the use of the spirit in the spiritual.
Right. So, of course, we know that African drumming was very much important in the culture. They brought that over to the Americas, and of course, the white slave owners probably did not understand what this drumming meant. Drumming was different. Different types of drumming were in the African music was for different events. So in the colonies, when they would begin to drum, that would signify different things. It could signify that we're going to run away, or there was an outbreak of a rebellion that's going to take place. So when the research has shown that there were moments when they would be drumming at night, and then 5 or 6 slaves would be gone the next morning. And the slave owner would pick up on that eventually, like, wait a minute, I heard these drums, and then this morning 5 slaves are gone, and next week are more drums, and so then they stopped the drumming. That was not allowed anymore. They also eventually allowed the enslaved people to begin to worship together with outside of the white church. And so they were drumming there and dancing, and it was more of a African-esque type of worship experience that we see today in the Pentecostal church, with the hand clapping and the waving and the gyrating and almost being overtaken by the spirit, right? And so that's definitely an African diaspora type of idea, that they will be overtaken by the ancestral spirits during the drumming and this religious experience. And we saw that in the bush harbors of the enslaved Africans at the early part of their time here. But the white church did not like the idea of them coming together in that way because they thought it was very barbaric. So they weren't allowed to do that. It wasn't until, I may be getting ahead of myself, the Great Awakening, when that became a little bit more accepted. But we do see a lot of body percussion happening, and you see that idea with the hand clapping and the foot stomping, even with the Black Greek fraternities and sororities, that is a tradition that they continue with the body motion. You'll see them patting and clapping and stomping, that kind of stuff. So that is a part of that rhythmic element that was brought over from Africa.
So those are the musical cultural elements, right, that are being brought over. And then as you explained, you know, they're being stripped away, right, or an attempt to strip away.
Attempt.
Right. So let's talk about, as you mentioned, this.
But can I just add one little thing about that stripping away? I think an important piece about that is that why do you think that these things are being stripped away? We're stripping away culture. We're stripping away identity, right? So that they can become assimilated to this idea of enslavement. We don't want anything that's going to hinder you from being obedient to what we want you to do out in these fields and in this big house and whatever we want you to do. So we take away, strip all away everything that you've learned, and then try to pour into you this idea of the scripture that says, be obedient to your master, right? So they start to do that, or you're going to go to hell if you don't do that. And then they really begin to talk about the fire and brimstone kind of thing. If you're disobedient. So now they start to impart this idea of enslavement being a Christian idea into these enslaved Africans, right? So I want to make sure that we understood and have an awareness that the stripping away of the drums wasn't just by happenstance. It was also intentional. Stripping away of their clothing, stripping away of their family structures, and selling family members away was to strip away their identity so that they can be assimilated into this idea of slavery.
So to that point, what you say in your dissertation is that enslaved people were brought to Christianity at first for that very reason, right? And you were just mentioning that, you know, as far as obeying your master or the fire and brimstone and all that. Now, of course, how do we? What got us from that introduction to Christianity, right, to then the text being used in the spirituals, which obviously is very much a Old Testament-based text? Why don't you talk us through that progression, right, and how essentially, you know, the spiritual on one level appears to be one thing, but then on another level, oh, it's actually this.
Right. Yeah, I think it's really interesting, and that's something that really, I think I wrote in the paper, that it is the genius of the text, the lyrics, I think is probably the most genius portion of the spiritual. Because, the lyrics, which were mostly taken from Old Testament stories, that they were forced to sit into, a part of the assimilation, was to sit in the back of the white church. They were also made to sit in the balcony of the white church. That's where we kind of get the idea of the balcony from, you know, that they would have to be made to sit there and listen to the preacher, and sometimes even an enslaved black preacher would be talking to them also, I guess, to get them on the side or to bring them in. But the black preacher had to tell the white slave owner what he was going to preach about, of course, and it was still about this idea of assimilation. But they heard these stories about Jonah and the whale, Moses and Pharaoh, Daniel and the lion's den, all of these wonderful stories that they kind of put themselves into, like the Hebrew children in the fiery furnace, 3 Hebrew boys, and the Jews being, under Egyptian rule. They felt like, oh, we can relate to this idea of this compassionate God that who came against these malevolent rulers to save his people, and they felt the same way about themselves. Hence, you would hear them, call Harriet Tubman the Black Moses, in a sense. So that way, we're still keeping up with that. But I think this resonated with them, with their current situation in their lives, and they imagined that this same God, because understanding that there were a lot of African cultures that were polytheistic, but they had an understanding of a higher being, an authoritative deity that could rescue them out of this situation. So, but we continue with the idea of the lyrics in the text, that many of these songs had double meaning. And this is why I say about the genius of the text was that they took this idea of what the white slave owners were putting on top of them and flipped them for their own benefit, which I think was genius. And we talked about one of the scholars, Q. Tracy, said you can sing about what you can't talk about. So they would sing about these people in the Bible. Am I getting ahead of myself, Adam? I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
Singing about these people in the Bible that, maybe the slave owners singing, they're singing about those wonderful people that we told them about. But really, they're saying, this God is going to rescue us also. And I think what's really also interesting is, too, they secretly shunned the white slave owners who made them go to church, who, of course we know, the worst slave owners were the ones who claimed to be Christians. And so they would pray on Sundays and rape women and murder people at night and beat folks. So they would secretly shun these slave owners who claimed to be Christians by saying, everybody talking about heaven ain't going there. Heaven. And here they are singing this within earshot of the slave owner, and they have no idea what they're talking about. But it's almost like, as the young people say, throwing shade on the slave owner and right there next to them, and not realizing that we're really talking about you, slave owner. That's the Christian that's beating us and enslaving us, talking about heaven, but you're really not going. Yep.
Yeah.
Isn't that great? I love that. I love it.
The spiritual has that meaning of course, and you also talk about the meaning of the coding in the spirituals,
yep.
Right? How the River Jordan stands in for the Ohio River, right? So
when you hear in the spirituals, when they're singing about, and one of the things about another element of the spiritual that's different than like gospel music, most spirituals are going to center around heaven. These people a lot of them did not see themselves as becoming free. So they would say, I will be free in heaven. One day, I got shoes, you got shoes. When I get to heaven, I'm going to put on my shoes, walk around heaven, that kind of stuff. So some of them never saw themselves as becoming actually free. But when they did sing about Canaan land, Beulah land, crossing over the Jordan, heaven, in some instances, it was a euphemism for the north. Not just southern United States north, but all the way to Canada, out west across the Ohio River, when they would sing about crossing over the Jordan. And even though these songs had other meanings besides what we hear, even in a song like Follow the Drinking Gourd, is not considered a spiritual per se, but it is a song that would be sung to amongst the enslaved community that would tell them how to maneuver to get to freedom. There was a story about the man with one leg, Peg Leg Joe, that would help the people get across the Ohio River. So in the song Follow the Drinking Gourd, it would say, left foot, peg foot, traveling on. So when you see that foot and the peg, you know that you're getting close to where this Peg Leg Joe guy is. And they would sing about the moss, and when the sun comes up and the first quail calls, follow the drinking gourd. The drinking gourd is being the handle of the drinking gourd is the tip of it signifies the North Star, and you follow that to freedom. So they're telling these stories. Even songs like Steal Away to Jesus, they would sing that as they're walking around the plantation to let people know, we're getting ready to go. Not only that, but we also are going to steal away to the Bush Harbor to worship in private by the river so that our master can hear the way that we're worshiping. When they would swing low, sweet chariot is another one, right? They're thinking about Elijah and Elisha, that when Elijah was being taken up, he threw the mantle down on his protege, but to the slave, it's like, here come the Underground Railroad coming to sweep us on the way. And when they would hear that, there was another that I wrote about. I wanted to find it to make sure that we understood that it was I can't remember what the name of the song was now. That it was a song about warning, like, we're not going to leave. because it's too dangerous to do that as well. So these songs had these coded meanings, double meanings. Wade in the water, right? Hop in the body of water when you hear the dogs coming to wash away the scent. But to the preacher, the white slave owner, the man by the pool of Bethesda, who sat there waiting for the angels to stir the water up so he can get in and get healed. Oh, that's so sweet, but no, they're really talking about getting that water so the dogs can't catch you. Yep, isn't that great? That's so fabulous. That's so wonderful. Oh, I love it.
Well, and
I do.
another fact I did not know until I read through your dissertation was the fact that, yeah, I'm giving you all the credit here, man. That the slave owners themselves would encourage and request the enslaved people to sing so they could keep track of their whereabouts.
Yeah, so when they were out, because of course, you're thinking about the slave owner probably didn't do much work, but the overseer, the one that he put in charge to be out in the fields, and you had hundreds of slaves on a huge, hundreds of acres of plantation land. Of course, they could not supervise every single person, so they would make them sing so they could hear where they are. And they will know, okay, well, they're still in earshot of us, so they force them to sing. And another key point about the spiritual and singing was that the tempo of the spiritual is dependent upon the work that the enslaved were doing at that time. So the idea of that, it made, number one, it made the work easier on the body because we're all moving at the same time. Similar to the chain gangs of the early 20th century, when you would see them, shoveling and they're singing and shoveling and singing, and it made the work go easier. And it still built a sense of community in a sense. That same community that the white owner tried to steal away, tried to strip away, they still found a way to still build community one amongst each other. And I think it's really, really kind of cool that when we're thinking about the singers out there, they were not only out in the fields, the adults, but the children. The children. So that these songs are passed down through the oral tradition because the children heard them. And I think we'll talk a little bit about that later on. But I think that it's important that we understand that this music was written by the enslaved, for the enslaved. It was never meant to, I have a score right here. It was never meant to be scored, right? Because once you score it, it loses its authenticity. So we as musicians, we as black people cannot sing the spiritual authentically because number one, we're not slaves. Because remember, it was written by and for the enslaved community. And once you score something that is meant to be passed down through the oral tradition by these indigenous groups of people, that could be indigenous blacks, it could be indigenous Hispanics, natives, it doesn't matter. Once you put it down on paper, it becomes inauthentic and you cannot sing it authentically because it loses some of its essence and some of the nuance that you cannot score nuance. You can try. I put a little grace note here, put a little symbol here to mean to bend the note, but you can't sing Sometimes I Feel Like a Motherless Child if you haven't lost your mother. Right? I don't hear nobody saying amen in the audience. Okay, all right, y'all know I'm Baptist. I know I'm a little bit of Presbyterian too, but I'm a little Baptist, gotta stay something back. So I think it's important that we use the score as a guide, right? And understanding what were these people dealing with in their lives? What type of backbreaking work were they doing? I wonder what did they feel in that moment where they were singing Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, right? Understand that they could be caught and killed or shipped away, their families been broken away, and you don't try to sing it and perform it as a black person or an enslaved person. You just do the best you can to bring this story to light, right? I know I'm going up on a tangent. I'm gonna stop.
No, this is a good tangent. I think this is a good segue. You're doing great. You're segueing us down, and it's exactly the direction I want to go.
Good.
Just to take a moment, though, and to realize how incredible this music is, right? Here is music that is deeply moving and profound, right? And that in so many ways, after the Civil War, it spread like wildfire, right? And you think about the context that you just walked us through the past 10 minutes under which that music was written, right? What other music in our cultural lexicon was written under such intense, stressful, tragic, unjust circumstances, right? Certainly Mozart wasn't writing music under those kind of circumstances, right? And so the miracle of this music to have been devised in such a unjust world, and to have such an emotional power to it that still resonates with us today, 160, 200, 250 years on, right? Yeah. So I wish this thing could go for 2 hours, Dr. Craig. We got lots to talk about. I'm already starting to think, well, maybe we need another part with you here along the way.
I'm here.
Yeah. I also meant to say this to you before, but as a tangent, and we know if you think you're the mental tangent king, then I'm I don't know, your right-hand assistant on mental tangents. But you need to bring while you're touring with your choir, you need to get your choir here to Denver, to Montview.
We'll work on that.
Okay.
We'll work on that. Give me another couple of years.
Yeah. So, at any rate, let's talk about that performance practice, right?
Sure.
And this idea of, well, actually, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's first talk about, for just a little bit, and maybe we'll even play a clip, the dissemination of the spiritual into the broader American culture, right? The fact that we're now, after the end of slavery, we've transitioned into this time where this is music written by enslaved people for enslaved people, right? And now it's for a wider audience, and some of it intentional, some of it appropriated, right? I know you can tell us a bit about Fisk and what the Jubilee Singers did at Fisk, and other things. I also was reading earlier too that white people were hearing these songs in the 1800s being sung on the plantation and attempted to start to write some of them down. Mm-hmm. So there was even an appropriated dissemination that was happening prior to the end of slavery. But I'll turn it over to you and your thoughts about Fisk and others.
Well, I think what's really important to understand about Fisk is Fisk was one of the first HBCU experience. Before we get into that, I wanted to just say a little bit about, it was in 1890, I believe, when we had the Morrill Act after the Civil War ended, that we had these land grant. The federal government allotted for land grants for institutions to educate people in the mechanical and agricultural arts. So you have this notion that a lot of those schools during that time period were catering towards the formerly enslaved, educating them, and the descendants of the formerly enslaved. And those schools became known as historically black colleges and universities. So you will hear a lot of them call themselves HBCUs, and Fisk was one of them. Fisk in Nashville was started for formerly enslaved peoples. And George White, who was, was the treasurer and the music teacher there. No formal training. And he decided to put together a choral ensemble to help raise money for the institution. And he started with about 9 or so of these people, and some of them were former slaves, some of them were descendants of the slaves. And he heard them singing songs that they had heard their relatives and ancestors sing on the plantation fields or even at home or in the church or what have you, and began to compose arrangements of these spirituals. And that's the difference between contemporary stuff we're only writing arrangements of spirituals now, because Remember, spirituals are composed by the enslaved, for the enslaved. So anyone tell you, I wrote a spiritual, they're not telling you the truth because you can't write a spiritual because you're not a slave. So you can write an arrangement of a spiritual. So just a little snippet of something, and then they would compose, arrange a larger piece. So they began to travel around, wasn't received at first, but eventually became very popular with the white audiences, and because the white audiences have not heard these choral concert arrangements of these songs. And some of the black folks did not like that idea that these are concertized arrangements of spirituals that were just really meant for a certain group of people. Well, eventually they traveled across the United States, and of course you probably know the history. They went overseas when they performed for Queen Victoria and some of other folks in Europe, and became very popular and raised a lot of money and saved the school. And the Fisk Jubilee Hall is named after the Fisk Jubilee singers on that campus now. And I was just telling Adam that they recently won a Grammy. I didn't say that part. They won a Grammy. They did a concert at Boulder a couple of years, maybe a year or two ago, and their director died unexpectedly a couple months ago. So, but that school, the Jubilee Singers, is mostly solely responsible for the outbreak of the concertized Negro Spiritual. And after that, a lot of black colleges started doing the same thing to raise money to support the institutions. And they still do it today.
A couple other additional interesting facts about that. Mark Twain was a huge fan and supporter of Fisk, and would travel around to see their concerts.
Really?
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and also, for those of you who are familiar with Jo Fokee or Jocelyn Ford Keel, Jo Fokee is her stage name, but Jocelyn, of course, sings here at Montview with regularity. She is a Fisk graduate and a Fisk Jubilee singer, was a longtime member of that choir. I want to play, if it's all right with you, Craig, as we're rapidly running out of time, so we're definitely on the books for part 2. Is that good, Clover, if we do another part of this? Clover's doing her cheering in the back.
Clover high!
I'll let you guys have a moment later.
Jealous much? Okay.
So if you go to the Wikipedia page, nothing like deep research by your Minister of Music on Wikipedia. But if you go to the Wikipedia page for Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, there you will find a recording of the Fisk Jubilee Singers from 1909 singing Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. And I picked this for a couple of reasons. One, it's an incredible historic artifact, right? To hear something that was sung 113 years ago, an arrangement, just as Dr. Craig was just talking about, right? Of a folk song that a concertized version. So already it's one step removed, right, from its authentic original form. And maybe our next talk we can talk about some of that disagreement that did occur even within the African American community over, no, it shouldn't be presented this way, it should be presented that way. So it's a struggle. It's been a struggle from day one, as far as when you take the spiritual out of the field, right? What is its most true representation? And the other reason why I wanted to play this was I was actually having breakfast. I didn't tell this to you, Craig, but I was having breakfast with Roger Holland a few days ago, who's the director of the Spirituals Project here in town. And Roger was asked a couple years ago by the American Choral Directors Association to do a cover story for them about spirituals and performance practice. And his views are much in line with Craig's, as far as bringing the intentionality and bringing the thoughtfulness to it. The same thoughtfulness that you would bring to Bach and Beethoven need to be brought to the spirituals. Roger was saying to me how he once heard this choir at the end of a concert doing "Swing low, sweet chariot, come to take me home." He's like, "Oh, hell no." So let us, I'm going to hit this couple buttons here, and this might actually be the way we end our time together, Craig, is by listening to this, and then can we go ahead and put you on the books for another part? Is that okay? I mean, I don't want to, right? All right, I know, we can just talk and talk and talk. All right, let's listen to this. Stop it there for now. Yeah. It's interesting listening to that, right? As far as their performance practice in 1909.
I think which is much more, it's closer to probably what would have been done in the, originally.
Yeah.
But I think listening to that, you have the idea of the call and response, which is the leader and then the response. And then you also think that mimics the black church where the preacher and the congregation will respond, right? We still see that in the black church today. And here again, I looked over Jordan, what I see, what he said, I'm sometimes up, but I'm heaven bound. They're still thinking about, I may not make it here on earth, but I'm going to, make it in heaven. Or I could be going to the north. It's so many different ways that you can look at that. But I think it's really, really cool that these people also were not trained musicians either. Most of them were, they just sang. He taught them these songs, and eventually, of course, in investing into them musically. But I think that's really integral to what would probably have been done originally.
Yeah. Well, Craig, thank you for joining us this morning very much. We are definitely going to do another part with you, and because there's literally like half the sheet we didn't get to.
I know.
So we need to have another session with you, and that will also, I'm sure, lots of folks have questions. So come back for our next session. We'll get it on the calendar. We'll get it out to you all, and you can put it on your calendar. Write the question down that you might have for Craig today, so you can ask it next time. Craig, we really appreciate you taking time out of your really busy schedule to be with us. You are the consummate educator. You inspire and engage like few others. So we're really fortunate to spend some time with you, even just virtually. So thank you, Craig.
And thank you for that. Is that Martha? Okay. I see the white hair. This one, they must be Martha. Okay.
That's Martha. Craig, she moved down just for you. Yeah, it's true. She was back. I said, "Come on, move down." She said, all right. All right. Craig.
I love you all so much. Thank you.
We love you too, man. It's great to see you. We'll talk soon, Craig.
Okay, take care.